Hello, if you have not subscribed to my channel, please do so by clicking on the subscribe button below. Hello friends, in this video I am going to tell you about 10 infamous executions in the United States and the last words of the condemned. According to the non-profit Death Penalty Information Center, 1,507 people have been executed in the US since the 1970s. In this video, we present 10 of the nation's most notorious, infamous criminals who have been executed. The first execution was in 1790 when Thomas Byrd, a British national, was hanged under the United States Constitution. The court system in the US was still being organized. Since then, executions have continued over the years. Death row inmates' last words. People want to know the last words spoken by the prisoner moments before they leave this world. In this video, we present some of these. Death sentences in the USA are down more than 80% from the 1990s. Fewer prosecutors are seeking capital punishment, and juries are more willing to sentence defendants to life terms with no chance of parole. The issue of death penalty is still one of the most debated in American politics, with many Americans opposed to the penalty. But the authorities stopped death penalty for a while, then they restarted with the hope that it will deter criminals. But due to many factors, including presence of deadly weapons in the hands of most people in the USA, death penalty has not and will never stop some people from taking the criminal path and killing people and then getting killed at the hands of the state. Number one, this is the most famous case that people know about. It's called the Rosenberg case. Rosenberg couple executed in 1953. On June 19, 1953, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, who were convicted of conspiring to pass US atomic secrets to the Soviets during World War II, were executed at Sing Sing prison in Ossining, New York. In fact, the US dropped atomic weapons on Japan in 1945, and a few years later the Soviets also tested their atomic weapons, so the United States started searching for spies who might have given secrets of the atomic bomb to the Soviets, because no country can build atomic weapons so easily or so quickly. Anyway, both the Rosenbergs refused to admit any wrongdoing and proclaimed their innocence right up to the time of their deaths by the electric chair. The Rosenbergs were the first US citizens to be convicted and executed for espionage during peacetime, and their case remains controversial up to this day. Only a few minutes before, President Eisenhower had rejected a last desperate plea written in her cell by Ethel Rosenberg. Mr. Emanuel Bloch, the couple's lawyer, personally took the note to the White House, where guards turned him away. Last statement. Neither of the two said anything before they died. Following the arrest of a German-born physicist who had worked on the Manhattan Project to develop the US atomic bomb, a series of revelations led in June 1950 to the arrest of Julius Rosenberg as an atomic spy. Ethel's arrest followed in July. Evidence suggests that Ethel was held mainly in an effort to force her husband to reveal further names and information. If Julius had only confessed, the state probably wouldn't have killed his wife and they may not have killed him. But he was such a hardcore communist. He would rather his family be destroyed than renounce communism. In 2016, two brothers, sons of Ethel Rosenberg, made a last-ditch appeal to President Obama to clear their mother's name. Michael and Robert Meeropol called on Obama to posthumously exonerate their mother, Ethel Rosenberg. At the time of their execution, FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover accused the couple of committing, quote, the crime of the century, unquote. The government stated that the Rosenbergs, along with Morton Sobel, helped the Soviet Union acquire the secret of the atomic bomb. But supporters say there is no evidence that Ethel Rosenberg took part in espionage. A new report by the Seton Hall School of Law suggests that Ethel was used by the government as a pawn for leverage in its effort to build a case against her husband. Julius Rosenberg was an engineer for the U.S. Army Signal Corps who was born in New York on May 12, 1918. His wife, born Ethel Greenglass, also in New York on September 28, 1915, worked as a secretary. The couple met as members of the Young Communist League, married in 1939 and had two sons. Julius Rosenberg was arrested on suspicion of espionage on June 17, 1950 and accused of heading a spy ring that passed top-secret information concerning the atomic bomb to the Soviet Union. Ethel was arrested 2 months later. Rosenbergs were turned in by David Greenglass, Ethel's younger brother and former army sergeant and a machinist at Los Alamos, the secret atomic bomb lab in New Mexico. Greenglass, who himself had confessed to providing nuclear secrets to the Soviets through an intermediary, testified against his sister and brother-in-law in court. He later served 10 years in prison. The Rosenbergs vigorously protested their innocence, but after a brief trial that began on March 6, 1951, and attracted much media attention, the couple was convicted. During the next 2 years, the couple became the subject of both national and international debate. Some people believed that the Rosenbergs were the victims of a surge of hysterical anti-communist feeling in the United States and protested that the death sentence handed down was cruel and unusual punishment. Many Americans, however, believed that the Rosenbergs had been dealt with justly. They agreed with President Dwight Eisenhower when he issued a statement declining to invoke executive clemency for the pair. He stated, quote, I can only say that by immeasurably increasing the chances of atomic war, the Rosenbergs may have condemned to death tens of millions of innocent people all over the world. The execution of two human beings is a grave matter, but even graver is the thought of the millions of dead whose deaths may be directly attributable to what these spies have done, unquote. Number 2 in our list is of Thomas Byrd. In 1790, Thomas Byrd became the first person in the USA to be federally executed under the United States Constitution. He was hanged on June 25, 1790, for piracy and killing his master, the captain of a slave ship off the coast of Africa. His last words, he proclaimed that he was innocent of murder. This was the first death sentence handed down by a U.S. District Court judge under the authority of the United States Constitution. The hanging was carried out by U.S. Marshal Henry Dearborn, who would later be appointed Secretary of War by President Thomas Jefferson. Number 3 on our list is David Earl Miller. His execution was on December 6, 2018 by electric chair. He used a fire poker to repeatedly stab Lee Standifer, a young woman who was born with mild brain damage and with whom he was on a first date nearly 40 years ago. His last words: "Beats being on death row." Miller continually thrust Standifer with a poker and drove the implement so deep into her in some places. The official said he would have needed to use a hammer. He claimed not to remember the murder, reportedly drunk and high on LSD at the time. Number 4 on our list is John William King. He was executed for his role in the murder of a 49-year-old James Byrd Jr., a black man who was chained to the back of a truck and dragged to death along a secluded road outside Jasper, approximately 130 miles northeast of Houston, early on the morning of June 7, 1998. Investigators said Byrd was alive for at least 2 miles before his body was ripped to pieces. His execution date, April 24, 2019. How? Via lethal injection. His last words: no last words. Mr. King was a white supremacist, and the murder is considered one of the most notorious hate crimes in American history. Number 5, John Gacy. John Wayne Gacy was an American serial killer and sex offender known as the Killer Clown, who assaulted and murdered at least 33 young men and boys. Gacy regularly performed at children's hospitals and charitable events as, quote, Pogo the Clown, unquote, or, quote, Patches the Clown, unquote, personas he had devised. He was also active in his local community as a precinct captain and a building contractor. Gacy was convicted of the sodomy of a teenage boy in Iowa in 1968 and was sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, but served only 18 months. He murdered his first victim in 1972, had murdered twice more by the end of 1975, and at least 30 subsequent victims were killed after his divorce from his second wife in 1976. The investigation into the disappearance of Des Plaines teenager Robert Peast led to Gacy's arrest on December 21, 1978. According to Gacy, all his murders were committed inside his ranch house near Norridge, a village in Norwood Park, metropolitan Chicago. He would typically lure a victim to his home, dupe him into donning handcuffs on the pretext of demonstrating a magic trick, then rape and torture his captives before killing him either via asphyxiation or strangulation with a govt. 26 victims were buried in the crawl space of his home. 3 others were buried elsewhere on his property, and the last 4 were discarded in the Des Plaines River. At the time, the conviction for 33 murders was the largest number charged to one individual in the U.S. history. Gacy was sentenced to death on March 13, 1980, On death row at Maynard Correctional Center, he spent much of his time painting. He was executed by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center on May 10, 1994. Number 6 on our list is Ted Bundy. Theodore Robert Bundy, born 1946, died 1989, was an American serial killer who kidnapped, raped, and murdered numerous young women and girls during the 1970s and possibly earlier. After more than a decade of denials, before his execution in 1989, he confessed to 30 homicides that he committed in 7 states between 1974 and 1978. The true number of his victims is still unknown and possibly higher. Bundy was regarded as handsome and charismatic, traits that he exploited to win the trust of victims and society. He would typically approach his victims in public places, feigning injury or disability, or impersonating an authority figure, before knocking his victims down unconscious and taking them to secluded locations to rape and strangle them. He sometimes revisited his secondary crime scenes, grooming and performing sexual acts with the decomposing corpses until putrefaction and destruction by wild animals made any further interactions impossible. He decapitated at least 12 victims and kept some of the severed heads as souvenirs in his apartment. On a few occasions, he broke into dwellings at night and bludgeoned his victims as they slept. In 1975, Bundy was jailed for the first time when he was incarcerated in Utah for aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. He then became a suspect in a longer list of unsolved murders in several states. Facing murder charges in Colorado, he engineered 2 dramatic escapes and committed further assaults in Florida, including 3 murders, before his ultimate recapture in 1978. For the Florida murders, he received 3 death sentences in 2 separate trials. Bundy was put to death in the electric chair at Florida State Prison in Rayford, Florida, on January 24, 1989. Biographer Ann Rule, who had previously worked with Bundy, described him as, quote, a sadistic sociopath who took pleasures from another human's pain and the control he had over his victims to the point of death and even after, unquote. He once called himself, quote, the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you will ever meet, unquote. Attorney Polly Nelson, a member of his last defense team, wrote Bundy was, quote, the very definition of heartless evil, unquote. Number 7 on our list is a famous man, Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh, born 1968, died 2001, was an American domestic terrorist who carried out the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people and injured more than 680 others and destroyed 1/3 of the federal building. The bombing was the deadliest act of terrorism in the U.S. prior to the September 11 attacks. It remains the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. Timothy McVeigh was a Gulf War veteran. He sought revenge against the federal government for the 1993 Waco siege that resulted in the deaths of 86 people, many of whom were children, as well as the 1992 Ruby Ridge incident, an American foreign policy. His aim was to inspire a revolution against the federal government and defended the bombing as a legitimate tactic against what he saw was a tyrannical government. He was arrested shortly after the bombing and indicted on 160 state offenses and 11 federal offenses, including the use of weapons of mass destruction. He was found guilty on all counts in 1997 and sentenced to death. McVeigh was executed by lethal injection on June 11, 2001 at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana. His execution was carried out in a considerably shorter time than most inmates awaiting the death penalty. Teddy Nichols and Michael Fortier were convicted also as conspirators in the plot. Nichols was sentenced to 8 life terms for the deaths of 8 federal agents and to 161 life terms without parole by the state of Oklahoma for the deaths of others. Michael Fortier was sentenced to 12 years imprisonment and has since been out of the jail. Lori Fortier was given immunity in exchange for her testimony against the others outside. 100 opponents of the death penalty held a silent vigil, and a handful of its supporters jeered, but definitely no one's mind was changed. In the minutes before he died, he appears to have done everything possible to demonstrate his control over events. From a curt nod to each of the media witnesses to the borrowed verses that he handed to the prison warden before his death. His last words were as follows. He wrote in his handwriting a poem, Invictus, written by the British poet William Ernest Henley in 1875. He handed it to the warden before his execution. It ends with the words, quote, I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul, unquote. McVeigh's fellow inmates have reported that he had kept a vegetarian diet in order to appear more emaciated on the day of his death. But for his last meal on Sunday, he ate 2 pints of mint chocolate ice cream. I guess that were his favorite food. Of the survivors and victims' relatives who came to watch, some complained that the death had been too easy, but most expressed satisfaction. One, Sue Ashford, a survivor, said, I'm elated. I didn't want him being paid for by taxpayers' money. That ice cream is the last food we are ever going to buy him, unquote. Number 8 on our list is Carlton Gary. Gary was executed March 15, 2018 for murdering 3 elderly women in Columbus in the late 1970s. Known as, quote, stalking strangler, unquote. 7 deaths were attributed to Gary, even though he was ultimately tried for the murders of only 3 women. For 7 months in 1977 and 78, the murders paralyzed Columbus and terrorized older women living in the community. The photo that we are showing is courtesy of Georgia Department of Corrections. Number 9 on our list is Albert Fish, known as the Gray Man, the Moon Maniac, and the Boogeyman. Fish was a cannibal and murderer who once said his victims numbered into the hundreds. However, he was tried and convicted in only 1 murder and died in the electric chair in Sing Sing, New York. The photo that we are presenting is courtesy of Wikipedia Commons, public domain. The last criminal on our list is Aileen Wuornos. Immortalized by Charlize Theron in the 2003 movie Monster, Wuornos was arrested for killing 7 men that she claimed had tried to rape her. She was executed by lethal injection in Florida in 2002. The photo we are presenting is courtesy of Wikipedia Commons, public domain. Thank you very much. And please don't forget to subscribe to my channel by clicking on the subscribe button. Don't forget to click on the bell icon so that you will be notified of any videos we post. Also write your comments in the section below. Hello. If you have not subscribed to my channel, please do so by clicking on the subscribe button below. You should also share this video with your friends by clicking on the share button below. You can share it via WhatsApp, via Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or via email. Please also write your thoughts in the comment section below so that others may benefit from your thoughts. You can also click on the bell icon so that you will be informed when I post new videos. Thank you.